Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Digital Leader Show, where we talk key issues and news at the intersection of business and technology, with a special focus on automation, AI, and digital transformation in hopes of making you a better digital leader. We're live every other Wednesday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, and today we're discussing data juice, squeezing the most out of your AI investments with Doug Laney, Innovation Fellow for Data Analytics Strategy at West Monroe, plus other headlines for digital leaders. I'm Dan Goodstein. I head up the Institute for RPA and AI, as well as the Digital Enterprise Institute. We are a professional association, media, and peer-to-peer research network, providing education, networking, and advice to over 130,000 members globally, all around automation, enterprise AI, and digital transformation. Check us out at irpaai.com. My co-host is Chris Cerdak. He's a former advisor for the White House Chief Transformation Office, automation AI practice lead at EY, and partner for digital transformation at Gartner. Chris, good afternoon.
How are you? It's been an exciting week already, huh?
Well, listen, I think I'm going to get another 11 hours a week of productivity when they ban TikTok.
Well, there is that, and then there's all the other implications of the wording of that. I think in many ways I agree the need to do some regulation there, but potentially overbroad language is going to have some really interesting implications. So, as we say almost every week, may you live in interesting times. We're certainly there.
It didn't really completely occur to me, that angle of it, till you and I were speaking last week, and you said, hey, there's have you actually read the language of this thing? But I will say it's always curious when legislation is bipartisan and moves as quickly as this one did. I mean, these politicians can't even put a budget together or agree on daylight savings time, but they seem to have agreed on this bill.
Well, and your point is so well taken, because this has been debated for several years, but now all of a sudden, boom, here it comes, to your point, and it moved very quickly. And I always take it back to my personal experience almost a decade ago, when I was helping to rewrite the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure based upon our work in e-discovery. And after 3 years, almost 4 years of argumentation and back and forth on the committee, we changed one word from and to or, and it fundamentally changed the meaning of that particular part of the Federal Rules of Civil Procedure, which is what guides attorneys on how to manage things in court. And so if you change one word like that, it has that much of a profound difference. Then you climb into the language of potential legislation like this, and you see the loopholes and the potential meanings of some of this stuff, and it should cause us to pause a bit.
Well, and I'm not necessarily against the idea, the sentiment behind this, right? The Chinese spy concerns that they have, but what comes to mind with this particular legislation is the whole aren't there bigger fish to fry conversations. And we were talking last week about the clickbait and the people that are stealing domains and things like that. There's an article in Wired this week about AI worms that are going into these large language models, these chat GPTs, and bouncing around with pulling information together. There's another hack this past week. So, it just seems to me there's and then what happens, right? Is it going to all move to Facebook or Instagram or, what?
Well, and I think that's the challenge. This is a genie that was let out of the bottle a long time ago. And so, the negative aspects you're not going to get rid of. If anything, it's going to just shift to other platforms, as you just said. Now, that being said, is there a reason to cut off the cancerous, gangrenous appendage that TikTok has really become in order to save the rest of the body? And there potentially is an argument for that. But I think having very specific legislation as opposed to overbroad legislation in this instance is the appropriate approach. And I would be concerned that this is somewhat, sort of Trojan horsing a Patriot Act 2.0, if you will, again, Patriot Act was intended to do many good things. I think there's a lot of evidence 20-something years later that it did some bad things, which is true of all legislation, it's true of all technologies. So I think your point is really well taken. This moves so quickly that should give us all the evidence that we need, that we should probably slow down a little bit.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and on the other side of the pond, big news around the EU regulation, right? It looks like they may be looking first at Apple. Apple seems to be in the crosshairs. Google has been for a while, and now Apple. I saw something this week about maybe the potential elimination of the Apple App Store, which is kind of wild.
Oh, and just now, moments ago, I saw another article pop up that then suggested, thanks to Brexit, the UK may now be a safe harbor for AI in Europe, which is a fascinating twist. This is potentially the pendulum swinging the other way, because generally the EU historically was kind of slower to implement stuff. That changed really with GDPR, their privacy regulation from 6-7 years ago. And now this step, which is a very bold step, is going to have all kinds of additional unintended consequences. But it sort of makes sense in that certainly American-based companies and also many Chinese-based companies were leaping ahead in the world of AI. So putting some regulations around that may slow that down a little bit. But again, this genie's out of the bottle, and it's more what can you do preventative at this point, or I guess remedial at this point as opposed to preventative, because it's there and it's coming. But I think we're going to have some really significant implications over the course of the next 12 to 18 months as these things manifest.
Yeah. So let's invite today's guest to the show. We're joined today by Doug Laney, as I said, Innovation Fellow, Data Analytics Strategy at West Monroe. He's also the author of Infonomics and Data Juice. Doug, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dan. How's it going, Chris? Good to see you again.
Likewise.
So before we jump in, Doug, maybe just tell everybody a little bit about your background.
Well, I spent the bulk of my career as a senior analyst with Gartner, focusing on data and analytics strategy issues. We stood up Gartner's Chief Data Officer Research and Advisory Group while I was there. Started my career with back in the Big Eight with Arthur Andersen Consulting, and did some time in the expert systems or early kind of AI pioneering world. Found my way into one of the first data integration companies, Prism Solutions, and yeah, that's about it. And now I'm with West Monroe, kind of like coming full circle, because West Monroe is, as we say, born from the ashes of Arthur Andersen after the Enron scandal about 22 years ago now. So a new consulting firm kind of sprung from that event.
Great.
Isn't it amazing, Doug? Everything old is new again. You mentioned expert systems, and you touched upon enterprise application integration. Mm-hmm. We're there all over again now that we're in so-called AI, right?
Yeah, no doubt. So my role now is in kind of being market facing and doing speaking and writing events, participating as a senior data strategist on projects, and then developing new and innovative offerings for the firm, particularly around data monetization and valuation, data and analytics maturity assessments, that kind of thing.
So if I may, based upon that, Doug, your Infonomics was your first book, correct?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, I led and edited and wrote part of an ebook for the Financial Times on big data back while I was at Gartner. So,
but Infonomics, phenomenal book, which built off. And I do want to point out, you're the father of big data. Came up with it, well, at least popularized the term and so forth, and really major influence on the whole world of data and analytics for the last couple of decades. But Infonomics was hey, by the way, folks, this information thing might become valuable one of these days, and you might want to understand it, treat it like an asset, huh?
That's right. Actually, there was a guy from SGI, Silicon Graphics, who came up with the term big data. I lopped down the 3 V's of that are used to kind of define big data: the volume, velocity, and variety.
And would you argue that that's even more true today than it has been in the past? That's certainly my argument.
Yeah, I mean, at the time we differentiated big data from other kinds of data in terms of its volume, velocity, and variety. I think today, almost all data, other than maybe reference data or metadata, is big data. So it's probably
Doug,
why we don't talk about it so much anymore.
Yeah.
You've been kind of part of this for a while, and I imagine you've been privy to the strategy of a lot of organizations over the years. How is the perception of data as an asset changed in the last few years, and with this kind of new surge in AI excitement?
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly organizations are realizing that they can do much more than just report on data now. There's still plenty of companies that are very happy building pretty pie charts and dashing dashboards and whatnot. But I think most organizations are realizing that data is more of and I hate to use the term fuel, because data has really unique characteristics that oil doesn't have. It's hard to go a day or a week without hearing somebody talk about data being the new oil, right?
The new oil, yeah. That was a catchphrase for a while.
But data's got these unique economic qualities, and I wrote about this in Infonomics, that it's non-rivalrous, meaning you can use the same data multiple ways simultaneously. It's non-depleting. You can use the data over and over again. It doesn't get used up like oil does. And that when you do use data, it creates more data, typically. So it's considered, the word is progenitive. And there are very few assets or resources that are non-rivalrous, non-depleting, and progenitive. So the organizations that have realized this, whether explicitly or not, are the ones that are really thriving today, the ones that are taking advantage of that. So, I think that's one of the bigger changes, that organizations are realizing they can do a lot more with data than just report on it. They can use it to drive operational efficiencies. They can even monetize it externally as well to drive new value streams.
Now that's interesting, Doug, because it's going to force me to do something I know you're going to hate, and that's propose 3 other potential characteristics that are different.
Oh, there's others for sure, but those are the 3 biggies. Yeah.
The ones that came to mind when I first read your book on this was data is not fungible. If I have data on your operations, that doesn't mean I have data on my operations. It's not exchangeable like dollars and euros. It's context sensitive, right? So unlike
much
oil,
more so than other assets. Yeah.
Yeah. And then it also has an expiration date. If I know the price of Apple next week, that's way more valuable than knowing the price of Apple yesterday.
Yeah. On the other hand, there's data like a blueprint for a bridge, right? Which is entirely not valuable for the 30 years where that bridge doesn't really need a lot of maintenance. But then when it needs to be replaced, then those blueprints come in handy. So yeah, certain kinds of data will expire or diminish in utility over time. But a lot of organizations are finding new and innovative ways to generate value from archived data or data they've forgotten about. And
so subsequent to that, Data Juice was sort of your follow-up encore. What led to Data Juice, and what was sort of the nature of coming up with that book?
Yeah, when I joined Gartner, they said, "Hey, Doug, you're the big data guy. We want you to cover big data and advise our clients on big data and research and write about it." And the questions started out being like, "What is big data?" Right? Then we had to address how do we do big data, and then the questions turned to, all right, what do we do with all of this big data? And I was like, I don't know. Let's go collect some stories. So we started collecting stories on how organizations were using data and analytics in innovative and measurably high value ways. We came up with 12 stories, turned into 50 stories, turned into about 500 stories. Now I've got about 1,000 stories in my, kind of my library. And folks said, hey, you should probably publish a book to, inspire companies to do more with their data, or shame them into doing more with their data. And so that was the genesis of Data Juice. But then I thought, rather than just presenting the stories, why don't we also kind of assess and provide a commentary on each of the stories? So I started writing those, and then I realized it was my advice was very homogeneous across from one story to the next. So I decided to conscript a bunch of friends in the industry, data and analytics executives, academics, consultants, professionals, each to write a commentary on the story. So I think one of the coolest parts of the book aren't the stories themselves, but the commentary and assessment from individuals suggesting, what challenges might the organization have had in implementing this idea, and then what could they do to kind of build on it to drive more value from it. So I think that's one of the coolest parts of the book.
So please tell me you've already copyrighted Data Shame as the
Data Shame, no. But folks are asking for like another book of more stories, maybe AI related ones. So we're thinking about that. I've got, like I said, I have a library of 1,000 or so use cases. But rather than writing a book, one of the things I've done, because we're talking about AI a lot, is build a chatbot that has been trained on these thousands of stories and all of my books and articles and stuff. And so my colleagues internally are using this to create statements of work or write proposals or respond to emails or whatever. So we call this chatbot, for lack of a better term, we call it Digital Doug.
I was just going to say, they're making you into a chatbot, Doug.
Right. So I'm trying to make myself obsolete. Right.
Right.
Yeah. So then I can maybe go retire. Right.
So you've clearly worked out all the royalty payments and so forth on your digital self, I imagine.
Well, there's a way to monetize it via the app that I used. I used an app called Custom GPT, and you actually can put a paywall on it, but I haven't done that. We're just using it internally.
Well, I bring that up somewhat flippantly, but that's actually now, I don't know if you saw the recent litigation that started from publishers now going after the major LLM providers, which potentially was inevitable. I don't know that they're actually going to be victorious, but sort of the battle over the battle space is kind of inevitable.
It's a tough call. I'm not an attorney, you are, but it's interesting how far you can push copyright laws to claim that somebody has violated that by training an LLM or a chatbot on some content.
As an engineer going to law school, what I learned is in engineering, there's one right answer and a million wrong answers. In the law, there's good arguments and bad arguments. There's no answers.
There's no answers. So, Doug, you mentioned, you kind of alluded to monetization. I'm curious, what are some of the more innovative data monetization strategies you've seen in some of those stories you were talking about?
Yeah, I go back to some that I talked about in Infonomics that were fun, like Walmart. Realized that they had a great search engine online, but it was there was a particular search term that was resulting in a really high degree of shopping cart abandonment, and the term was the word house. And when they looked into it, they realized that the search term actually coincided with the season premiere of a particular television show, the show House. But instead, the chatbot was taking people to housing wares and dog houses and doll houses and stuff. And so when they realized what people were actually looking for, they also realized that their search engine was you're talking about context, Chris, was non-contextual, was not aware of what's going on in the world at the time. So when they upgraded that search engine to also score and take into consideration what was trending on social media, they reduced shopping cart abandonment by 10 to 15% across the board. Now, in Walmart terms, that's like another $1 billion of revenue. So that's a great example. Kind of more internally, I spoke in an event one time about dark data, data that's unused or underutilized. And one of the people in the audience asked, what dark data do we have? And I said, well, you're a consulting firm. It was one of the big four CIO with one of the big four systems integrators. And I said, well, you're probably sitting on, years and years of archived emails. And if you analyze those emails, you could identify project issues that are related to scope or budget or personnel or technology and get an early warning signal for those issues before the typical status reporting method. Somebody types up a status report, sends it to their manager. They type up status report, sends it up to their director, and and then maybe something gets escalated. So this early warning signal concept was actually picked up on by Lockheed Martin, and I believe it's on their F-35 line, that they were analyzing project documentation and communications to identify early warning signs of project issues, and they claim they now have 3 times greater foresight using less information, and are saving hundreds of millions of dollars a year in prior cost overruns. So that's a great example. L'Oreal has this thing called the Voice of Beauty Command Center, where they They analyze social media posts that are related to beauty or their products or their competitors. They route them internally, and then somebody can respond. A little bit more of a manual effort, but still, generating value from external data. So that's all kind of indirect monetization. Then there's direct data monetization, where we're working at West Monroe with a global herbal supplement company that's identified. We've helped them identify hundreds of millions of diversified revenue, dollars of diversified revenue by licensing their data about its sales and demand and inventory, customer reviews to pharmas and hedge funds. And similarly, we've worked with a children's hospital system to identify at least $100 million in annual licensing of de-identified and aggregate information on things like clinical pathways and drug efficacy in children, and making that available to farmers as well. Plenty of other stories. One's kind of fun. I worked with, and I could name them because they talk about this publicly. Allstate, the insurance company, came to me and they said, "Hey, with the automobile there's an automobile company that wants to purchase or license our claims data because they want to build better, safer cars. They want to understand what's happening during accidents, and we're the good hands company. That's their motto. So we can't be seen as selling our data to our customers' data to anybody, even if we anonymize it and deaggregate it, anonymize it. Chris, you talk about this a lot. Even if you do all those things, you still have the reputational issue. And so I said to them, this is not a technical issue. This is a brand issue, not a technical or data issue. It's a brand issue." And they said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Well, why not take it off brand and create a joint venture or a separate company to do this, to kind of downplay, Allstate's, involvement?" So 7 months later, they launched the company Arity, which is a platform for, insurers to monetize their data. So tons of stories like this. Wow. I could tell you 1,000.
Yeah, I'll just find your chat bot.
Yeah, I'll send you guys a link. It's not public yet, but I'll let you play around with it.
So how has it evolved? So are these AI specific examples, or how has it changed in the last few years with the AI focus?
Yeah, I think AI as a kind of a analytics on steroids. We can think about it that way. And so there's some cool examples like Salesforce's Einstein, which is a AI powered platform for machine learning to analyze customer data, helping them predict customer behavior. Spotify and a lot of other companies have personalized recommendation engines that are AI based. Zest Finance is a company that uses AI to analyze non-traditional credit data to provide credit scores for individuals who might not have them via traditional means. There's a lot of unbanked people out there who need credit. MasterCard uses AI in fraud detection. Stitch Fix uses AI for online personal styling service. So tons of examples out there, and I'm sure there's, in the time that I just mentioned those, probably 100 more were created.
No, I love that because coming from an outsourcing and then a RPA background, so much of the conversation has always been about just the cost side of things, or that it became spun as efficiency, right? But some of these examples are real revenue creators, new revenue streams, or revenue enhancement opportunities. I'm a big fan of some of the stuff happening in the CX space around, AI. I was speaking to a couple members this week that were briefing us on some new technology in that space. So that's exciting. And then, so what's your advice to organizations who, okay, on one hand, maybe they're not using the data enough, they're not monetizing the data enough. Then they say, okay, we're gonna do that. Now you have the data ethics and governance challenges, right? What's your advice?
Yeah, I mean, I would start with the first part of that question. How do they get started with data monetization? I would say, ideation workshops. And so at West Monroe, we run these for clients, almost every week, where we're the basic process is in these workshops is what data do you have, okay, and what could this data tell us, or who might be interested in this data? What are the entities throughout your extended business ecosystem who might find some of your data or insights about your data or business valuable? We generate hypotheses that kind of go beyond just looking at hindsight-oriented analytics, but what could we diagnose or predict or prescribe or automate or digitalize? And then I don't know, what else do we do in these workshops? We look at the variety of ways that data can be monetized and kind of think through examples of each of those. We can use data we can sell data directly. We can create aggregate data. We can create data products from that. We can integrate data into existing systems. We can use data to measurably improve operational performance or reduce risk. We can bake data into existing products or services, or extract data from existing products or services to monetize it. So there's about a dozen different patterns of data monetization that we've identified by kind of doing a meta-analysis of all these stories we've collected. And we want to make sure that the clients that we're working with are thinking through each of these kinds of examples. Remember, I mentioned that each of these kinds of patterns. So remember, I mentioned that data is a non-rivalrous, non-depleting asset. So if you get fixated on just one way of monetizing or using data, then you're really limiting the potential benefits from it. So those are the things that we do during the workshops. We also look at examples, real world examples, and how can we adapt those ideas to your own business. Even we'll look at examples from other industries. And companies always ask me, Doug, what are others in our industry doing? And I say, my flippant response is, why do you want to be in second place or third place? Why not, try to adapt ideas from other industries? I mean, there's a great example in the city of Los Angeles. Identified that crimes kind of follow a pattern that is similar to aftershocks. Right. So one crime occurs, and then other crimes tend to follow for one reason or another. And what they realized is they could apply seismic prediction algorithms to crime patterns to deploy resources where follow-on crimes were more likely to occur. And this actually evolved into a business called PredPol, P-R-E-D-P-O-L, predictive policing. And in LA, where they implemented it, reduced violent crimes by about 30%.
Wow. Interesting.
So that's a great example of adopting an idea from another industry. And I think, it's hard for organizations to kind of get out of their own head, individuals to get out of their own head and be aware of what's happening in other industries. So that's something that I try to bring to clients, is that awareness.
And Doug, it's an amazing insight, because all the companies that you already have the data, you've absorbed all the costs and risk associated with collecting it, storing it, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And really, you're almost presenting a complete upside. It makes me think of, Michael Jackson, when he recorded Thriller. He's like, the first CD cost $10 million to produce, right. The next CD cost half a penny.
Yeah.
And you're really like that as you start to monetize data that you've already collected.
Yep, for sure. Yeah. And we actually, valuation is part of these exercises as well. We've developed some data valuation models. We also partner with an organization that does market valuations of data. And so showing them up front the limited value that their data is currently providing versus what that upside could be really helps motivate them. Yeah.
Dan,
you were asking about ethics as well.
Yeah, I was just going to say, we were starting to touch on governance. I know a lot of our audience is asking on issues of AI governance. How has that changed? In your view, what are some of and obviously it's coming up in legislation now. What are you seeing as some of the key challenges there? Yeah,
so you guys were talking about the TikTok thing earlier, and not to get political, but it definitely is a political thing. The TikTok's got minority Chinese ownership, or ByteDance does. All the U.S. data is stored and secured by Oracle in Texas. The headquarters is in Singapore. They've got U.S. board members. So I don't know. I think it's kind of goofy. But then again, I applaud President Biden's executive order aimed at preventing the sale of sensitive data to countries that are deemed adversarial. So I kind of applaud that. And it's supposed to be enforced by the Department of Justice, but how much teeth does an executive order actually have? We'll see. But as far as kind of the role of ethics and governance, I've long advised companies to not develop policies out of the box, but start with principles, and that way you're actually engaging the business and bringing them along for the ride. Like what are the principles around how we're going to collect data, manage data, use data, deploy AI, experiment with AI. What are those principles? And then from those principles, you can develop guidelines and standards and procedures and policies, and then a system of carrots and sticks, and monitoring as well. So I think all of those have to come together. But a lot of organizations make the mistake of sitting down and writing policy rather than sitting down with the business and developing higher level principles first. But then, yeah, go on, Chris.
No, I mean, Doug, that's absolutely phenomenal. Yeah. Principles guide, policies constrain.
Yeah.
And working a long time in regulatory compliance stuff, the only thing worse than having a policy, not having a policy, is having a policy you can't enforce or don't follow.
Yeah. So that monitoring and carrots and sticks, or let's add training in there as well. I think, especially when we get into ethics, training is important. Yeah. And so I would also say, obviously organizations need to, from that, kind of develop a code of ethics, maybe even hire a digital ethicist, or designate someone as a digital ethicist. I'm a huge fan of red team assessments of any and all data uses, especially those where data or data derivatives or data products are being exposed externally. It's good to have a red team to think about what are all the untoward ways that somebody who gets the hand on your data or data product could use it. I mean, you could be violating privacy, you could have security breaches, you could be shedding intellectual property, there could be compliance risks, you could have quality and integrity issues that once data is shared, that controlling its quality and accuracy becomes impossible. It can become misinterpreted or manipulated. You can suffer reputational damage. You can have operational risks by sharing incorrect or outdated data. You could have contractual and legal liabilities. There's cost implications of continuing to share and prepare data. And then there's the whole problem of unintended uses. You don't know how people who you're sharing your data with are going to actually use it. So having kind of a red team that thinks through these sort of things, and led by a digital ethicist and compliance personnel, I think is really critical. Yeah.
Interesting. What do you think, has been this, I feel like it was a big trend for a while, and then it kind of waned, and now it's coming up again, right around chief data officers and their role as it relates to all of this. Are you seeing that kind of evolve, and what's the strategy behind the digital transformation initiatives? How's that evolved?
Yeah, this kind of goes back to the initial conversation around the value of data and Infonomics. I think this recognition that data is or should be an asset is what really gave rise to the role of the chief data officer. I've long been an advocate of bifurcating the IT organization into separate I and T organizations. One that deals with technology, one that deals with information or data. And we're starting to see that, I think, more and more, where CIOs are ceding responsibility for all things data to a chief data officer, maybe even including analytics, in which case you've got a chief data and analytics officer. And then the big question lately that's coming from a lot of our clients is, all right, so what are the responsibilities related to AI for the chief data officer? Right? And so again, I think it goes back to data, preparing data for AI. And then using any kind of managing and governing the use of any output from the AI applications as well. I think that should be in the purview of the CDO. And we still have this issue that data is not a recognized asset according to the accounting profession. You asked kind of about the background on Infonomics, and the genesis of that was not only early work that I did at Arthur Andersen as a data administrator, and then getting into natural language query solutions and then data integration. But I tell the story about 9/11, and after the 9/11 terror attacks, some clients started contacting us at Gartner, lamenting not only the tragic loss of life, but also the loss of their data. Right. Mm-hmm. So this is in the days before cloud and offsite backups. So companies actually lost their data. It became an existential event. They didn't know who their customers were. They lost contracts. They lost transaction data. Some even lost employee data. They didn't even know who their employees were. So a couple of the companies came to us at Gartner and said, hey, can you help us value the data that we lost so that we can submit claims to our insurers?
Claims, right.
That makes perfect sense. So we helped them do that because we had done some early work on creating data valuation models, or actually adapting traditional valuation models to data. And then the insurance companies roundly denied those claims, suggesting that data wasn't covered by your P&C policies, wasn't considered a property. And so that kind of got the hair on the back of my neck, raised up. And I'm like, well, wait, isn't data a property? Isn't it an asset? So I crack open my accounting books from university and learn that an asset is something that's owned and controlled, exchangeable for cash, and generates what accountants now call probable future economic benefits. And so clearly data meets the criteria of an asset. It's just that the insurance companies didn't recognize it. So what the insurance industry did was this really got me going, was they updated the commercial general liability policy standard used by all insurance companies to explicitly exclude data from P&C policies. They did that. They made that change a month after 9/11.
Wow.
And then the courts got involved, and the courts are still confused as to whether property law should apply. Some courts have said, yeah, data should be considered property because it can be represented by bubbles on an optical disc, or it can be printed. One other court ruled that data shouldn't be considered property because, because electrons have negligible mass.
No way.
Yeah. So that's the kind of crazy fucked up world we're living in. Funked up, I said, world we're living in. And then the accounting profession says, well, listen, if the insurance industry is not going to recognize data as property, and the courts are confused, then we're not going to recognize it as an asset. So now, even if you wanted to, they actually updated a key financial standard that now prohibits the capitalization or recognition of data on balance sheets.
Wow.
And yet, in the last week or so now, all the publishing agencies are coming after the big LLM providers for using their content. So once again, 20 years later, we go full circle.
Yep. So anyway, that's the kind of the world we live in right now, and I think that it's in direct dichotomy to organizations that are trying to treat data as an asset and do more with it. So,
so Doug, I'm curious.
Let's forget what the accountants say.
Doug, did you have a hand in actually picking Bill Murray to play you in Groundhog's Day?
No, but it's a long story. Actually, Tom Cruise did play me in the film Risky Business, but that's a long story.
I thought that was Top Gun. No.
Not Top Gun.
So as you look at, and clearly you're talking to a lot of clients now that are trying to engage with LLMs and generative AI and so forth. It's obviously a big data play, but I mean, I often feel like we've heard this before. We heard this with RPA, cloud, et cetera. Every technology wave is this new revolutionary thing. I mean, if you sort of had just a handful of points to separate the wheat from the chaff in this messaging around AI, what would be some of your key points for people to embrace it, but let's not get over exuberant, let's say?
Yeah. If the hype leads to more and more pilots and more companies experimenting with it, then I'm all for it, right? That's where kind of hype drives that. When hype drives, financial markets, it's not so great, but whatever. People will get rich. I actually think, technology has consistently put entire professions out of work. Whether it's, I think you've talked about this, Chris, from the buggy whip manufacturers when automobiles were introduced at the turn of the 20th century to telephone operators in the 60s, to typing pools in the 80s, to product pickers in distribution warehouses and stock traders today. There's data and analytics and just-in-time logistics. They've all led to a real profound effect on the amount of inventory and thereby the inventory management resources companies need today. So yeah, it's going to definitely put people out of work, but just as much as technology has replaced humans, I think innovating with these technologies is creating new industries and new kinds of jobs. So like look at the broader gig worker industry that's emerged over the last 10 to 15 years. That's because we now have an internet, right? And the number of startups that are baking Gen AI into new innovative products and services, it's just is blossoming. And I think that's all goodness. I think once generative AI applications can really integrate and coordinate among multiple apps and systems and processes, then yeah, a lot of jobs are going to be at risk, from drivers to realtors to accountants, financial analysts, graphic designers, market researchers, financial analysts, programmers, lawyers, even teachers. I think some of those jobs, or at least the traditional way we're delivering those jobs, are going to be at risk.
Yeah, certainly the way we deliver them, right? I mean,
Yeah.
it's already happening. I learned that the Gen Z, the kids are going to TikTok as their primary search engine. It's just different model, right?
Yeah, and kids are saying, listen, I don't need to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to graduate school or sometimes even college. I can get trained on Coursera or whatever online.
Just YouTube.
I just need to get a certification on Power BI or Python or whatever. I don't need a full college degree or a graduate degree in data science. And in fact, there are new companies now that are gauging candidates. I don't know if I can disclose it publicly yet, but that are gauging candidates not based on their resume, but by giving them challenges, giving them online challenges to work on, saving the video and the information about the process they went through to solve that problem, and then making that part of their their resume that they can share with employers. And if you can do that, then do you need a college degree? Do you need an advanced degree? I'm not so sure.
Actually, Doug, that leads me to. So I know that you teach your master's course. Been doing that.
Yeah, now I'm in trouble with the University of Illinois for just that making that statement.
Well, I know last year you rather than saying can't use chat, I think back to when we were in high school and you couldn't use a calculator. Right. We all had the Casio watch that we had to hide under our jacket. But conversely, you said no. Let's teach people how to actually integrate this into their learning. So you want to touch on some of how you did that with your master's program?
Yeah, this is really fun. Thanks for bringing it up. So I teach an MBA class on Infonomics at the University of Illinois. I've got anywhere from 200 to 400 students in that class each year, and one of the assignments I give the students is to go out and interview somebody from a company on what data they have, how they collect it, how they generate it, how they manage it, how they govern it, how they use it, over a course of a few assignments. And increasingly, the students had complained that they haven't been able to find somebody at one of these companies, at a company who will disclose all of that to them, because of privacy restrictions. And so I said, well, why don't I create a fictitious company and a chatbot that represents a communications director for that company, that the students can then interact with via the chatbot and learn about the company and then use that information for their assignments. So I actually used, I think, ChatGPT and a couple other LLMs to generate the background profile for this fictitious company, and then used another tool to train the chatbot. And now the students can use the chatbot in their class, and then they actually can record the interactions that they have. That's a requirement as well. So the other things that we've done is I've actually played around with grading essays, training an AI on the rubric itself, and in some cases I've been able to achieve greater consistency of grading than the whole team of 8 to 10 course assistants that I have assisting with the grading. So that's a possibility. I'm not sure we're going to roll that out this year, but we may use it as an adjunct to the traditional grading, but it works pretty well.
One of the things I encourage people, rather than supplant humans, supplement. And those sound like really good examples of that. Everyone wants to wipe out their workforce and just go with AIs, and like, nah, these are enhancements; they're not replacements.
Yeah, in a lot of cases, yes.
Doug, before we let you go, any thoughts about the future? What's coming next?
We're talking about being worried about TikTok and whatnot. I think the bigger issues are things around quantum computing and deep fakes, and of course where in the world is the Princess of Wales. We're all kind of concerned about where she is right now. So Yeah, I think they're a bigger fish to fry. I think quantum computing is going to be particularly scary, yeah, and interesting, and game changing.
All right, we'll have you back on in a couple months to break that down for us, Doug.
Well, I don't know, that's my forte, but thank you, guys. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it. Great to be with you.
Yeah, thanks for joining, and good to have you. So, Chris, good conversation. What do you think? Are you more optimistic or more pessimistic now?
Well, I've never been pessimistic. Well, it's that old saying, one person's optimist is another person's realist or whatever. I just really appreciate both the positive and the negatives, and I think Doug touched on that a lot. Right? There's less. I'm always struck by how much we keep going back to the same problems again and again. And very pointedly, he was bringing up things that we dealt with 20, 25 years ago, and they're back again. Yeah. And I often say the technology is constantly changing. The thing that isn't changing is us, at least not very quickly. And so generally, the difficulties anyone has with implementing technology come down to, people and what we organize, not the technologies themselves. I think it's part of the challenge, and let's embrace the positive and kind of mitigate the negative, and that's how we get the best results.
Thanks for joining us, everybody. We'll be back in 2 weeks, live noon Eastern, 9 Pacific. In the meantime, check out irpaai.com, join our free membership, or schedule a complimentary industry briefing. Chris, have a great week.
You too. Take care.
Take care, everybody.